Welcome to Rising Parent, your go-to podcast for nurturing compassionate little hearts. I'm your host, Tim, and I'm here to help you raise a child who sees the world through the eyes of others. But first, please subscribe to our podcast. It helps us to provide valuable content that will support you on your parenting journey. In this episode, Edna and I will be diving deep into the power of empathy and exploring practical strategies to teach it to your little one. From modeling compassion to encouraging perspective-taking, we'll cover it all. So, grab your favorite beverage and get ready to cultivate a more compassionate world, one child at a time.
Building a better world. And I know that sounds really grand, doesn't it? But honestly, it often comes down to something so simple, something we talk about a lot on this show. It's empathy.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about being nice, right? It really is the bedrock of a kind and functioning society. And that's what we're diving deep into today. How to cultivate empathy, especially in kids.
It's so important.
It is so important. And we've got two pretty different sources for this deep dive. So on the one hand, there's Nicolene Peck. She's a parenting expert. She's all over YouTube, and she brings years of experience working with troubled teens. So let's just say she brings a really unique perspective.
Yeah, it's not the first place we think of. When we think about empathy, teens, especially ones that are having a tough time, they're not necessarily the poster children for empathy, are they?
No, not at all.
So this is going to be good.
This is going to be good. And then on the other hand, as a counterpoint to her very structured approach, we have this collection of more general tips. So it'll be interesting to see what clicks more for me, for you, for listeners.
Yeah.
So let's start with Peck. One of the first things she points out is that, kids are naturally pretty self-centered.
Oh, yeah.
But not, and this is key, not out of malice.
Right.
It's actually like survival.
Makes sense.
It makes sense when you think about it from, their perspective.
Yeah, and we forget that, don't we? It's like we approach it from our completely adult perspective. They have very limited life experience to draw on. They're totally dependent on us, these big, scary adults, to meet their needs.
Right. And she uses this example. Imagine, a 6-year-old bringing you breakfast in bed.
Yeah.
Adorable. You're right. So sweet. But she challenges us. She asks, is that really empathy? Or is that a learned behavior? And it kind of makes you think, what does genuine empathy even look like in those really early years?
Yeah, how do we cultivate that? How do we even recognize it?
Exactly. And one of the things she argues, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that one of the biggest hurdles is actually us, the adults.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're so quick to jump in and fix things for our kids that we actually rob them of the chance to grapple with their own challenges and consider other people's perspectives.
It's that swooping in, isn't it? It's like we swoop in and solve the problem. And we do that all the time. We just want to solve it. We want to move on. But really, that's a moment, isn't it? That's a moment where something could be learned.
Exactly. And so how do you find that balance? Because on the one hand, you don't want to leave your kid totally hanging. But on the other hand, you don't want to rob them of those opportunities.
Yeah, it's tough. It's that balance.
It is. But those moments, she says, especially when we're correcting our kids, those are crucial.
Makes sense.
And she argues that empathy is a choice.
It is.
It's something we have to choose, even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard. And, when you're dealing with a kid who's pushing your buttons, it is hard.
Yeah.
And she has this great, oh my gosh, I don't know if you've seen this, it's a while back, but she talks about her experience as a foster parent. Oh. And she worked with some really, really challenging teens. And there's this one story about a canning jar, and I don't want to spoil it, but it's one of those stories that's both funny, it's poignant, and it just really stayed with me. It really underscores how much we have to put ourselves in other people's shoes to even begin to understand.
It's remind me of that quote, I don't know if it was Maya Angelou or somebody else, but people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's what she was talking about.
100%. And so, one of the things she introduces, and this is where it gets really practical, is this idea of, she calls it disagreeing appropriately.
Okay.
And it sounds really basic.
It does, yeah.
But it's actually about teaching kids how to value other people's opinions, even when they don't agree with them.
Oh, that's huge. That's huge.
It is. It is huge because think about it. It's not just about, getting along with your siblings or your parents. It's about engaging in dialogue in society.
Civil discourse. So we desperately need that skill.
We do. We're failing at it.
Yeah.
We need to bring it back.
Mm.
And she even suggests using family meetings as a training ground.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's about having that structured, safe space where kids can voice their opinions, disagree respectfully.
So it's bringing structure to something that we think is, all emotional, but really creating that system.
It's fascinating, right? So that's Peck. Very structured approach. Now, I'm curious, from these more general tips, what resonates with you? What are we going to dive into?
Let's do it.
So this source really zeroes in on perspective taking. You're saying it's like the foundation of empathy,
Yeah, if you can't see things from another person's point of view, how can you understand them?
You can't, right? It's impossible. And they have all these practical tips for how to actually, help kids do that.
Okay, like what?
So one that really jumped out to me was using stories.
Oh, interesting, because kids love stories.
Exactly. And so it's like taking something they already love and then like embedding these little empathy lessons in it.
Ooh, sneaky. I like it. So how do they say to do that?
Well, they said like as you're reading a story with your kid, like pause at different points and ask them to imagine how the different characters are feeling.
Oh, that's good. So they're really flexing those perspective-taking muscles.
Exactly. And you know what else I thought was interesting? This echoes something that Peck talked about, and it's modeling.
Oh, yeah, right, because we can't just tell kids to do it. We have to actually embody it, right?
Yes, but this source takes it a step further.
Oh, how so?
They suggest like sharing our own struggles with our kids and even like negative emotions like frustration.
See, now that's interesting to me because I think there is this instinct to like present a perfect front to our kids, like mommy and daddy have it all figured out.
Right, like we're always happy and,
Right, everything's fine. Just keep it real with the kids, let them see you sweat a little bit.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's about being authentic.
Yeah, normalizing it because
Yeah.
then they feel safe to share that stuff too, right?
Yes, 100%. Oh, and speaking of broadening perspectives, this source also talks about exposing kids to like diverse experiences, different cultures.
Yeah, get them out of their bubble.
Yes. Take them out of their comfort zone, but like in a safe way, obviously. And they had all these ideas for how to do that. So books, art, music, anything that allows kids to kind of like interact with like different cultures and different perspectives.
So it's about kind of like breaking down stereotypes and building understanding.
Exactly.
It's like planting those seeds of curiosity when they're little, like
Yeah.
showing them that the world is so much bigger and more interesting than just, their backyard.
It is.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't talk about empathy without talking about active listening.
Right, right.
It's not just hearing the words.
Which, let's be honest, is hard enough sometimes. But yeah, to really be empathetic, you have to go deeper.
You have to. It's about really trying to grasp what the other person is saying, seeing it from their point of view, which I think, honestly, is a skill that goes way beyond childhood.
Oh, essential for life. Marriage, work, friendships, you name it.
Everything. It's about, like, really being present, engaged, and genuinely trying to understand where the other person is coming from, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
100%. I'm noticing this thread through both sources, as different as they are. It's this idea that empathy is an active practice,
It's a skill.
It is. It's a skill. And I think we forget that. We think, oh, some people are empathetic and some people aren't. But really, it's something you have to work at.
It's like a muscle. And if you don't use it, you lose it.
Exactly. And what really brought that home for me was what Peck said about correcting with empathy. Because that's hard. It's so hard.
That's when our patience is the thinnest. That's when we're most likely to just like, snap. But that's when it matters most, right?
It does. It makes me think about, this whole idea of focusing on justice, which is important, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I wonder if sometimes that focus on justice can actually come at the expense of empathy.
Whoa, okay, say more about that, because that's interesting. Peck kind of touched on it. But this other source, they really made me think about that tension between the two.
Yes. And it's not that they're mutually exclusive, but I think it's easy to get so caught up in like righting wrongs that we forget to like really see the people involved on all sides.
Right, because it's complex. Most situations are not black and white. There's a lot of gray area. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so much to unpack here.
Yeah.
As we're kind of, going through these two different perspectives, what's resonating with you? Like, what feels actionable in your own life? Because that's what I'm really trying to figure out.
It is. It's about how do we take this and actually do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Because we can talk, we can have these deep dives, we can agree, but then how do we walk the walk.
And it makes you wonder, like, what about those of us who maybe we weren't raised this way? Like we didn't learn these skills early on. Is it too late? Can you learn empathy as an adult, or are you kind of stuck with, like, the habits you developed growing up?
That's a good question. And, I think a lot of us wonder that, especially when we see, like, certain public figures or whatever, and you're just like, how are you so...
Lacking in it.
Yes. And the good news, the hopeful answer, I think, is that empathy is like any other skill.
Okay.
You can learn it even later in life. It might take more work. You've got to undo some of those old patterns maybe.
Sure.
But it's possible.
So, like, where do you even begin? If someone is listening to this and thinking, like, yeah, maybe I haven't been as empathetic as I could be, what are those first baby steps?
Well, I think, honestly, it starts with just, like, looking in the mirror, like really taking stock of your own behavior, your own reactions to things, and just noticing, like, are there places where you could stand to be a little more understanding, a little more compassionate?
Okay, and then, so once you do that, like, then what?
Then you have to practice. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's like
No.
anything else you want to get good at, you have to actually do it.
So what does that look like, practically speaking?
So, seek out conversations with people who are different than you. And I don't just mean like racially or culturally, although that's important too, but like people who have different viewpoints, different life experiences. And really listen to understand, not just to respond.
It's so hard.
It is. Our brains are wired to like jump in with our own opinions and experiences. But to truly be empathetic, you have to quiet that voice and really try to see the world through their eyes.
So it's almost like it's not just about learning a new skill. It's about, like, unlearning some old ones, too.
100%. Yeah. It's about challenging your own assumptions, getting uncomfortable, and realizing that, like, your way is not the only way.
That's a really good point to end on. Your way is not the only way. And isn't that what empathy is all about?
It is. And, even though this deep dive has been about empathy and kids, I think that's a message for all of us.
Absolutely. To everyone listening, we hope this has given you some food for thought, maybe some practical tips, and most importantly, inspired you to approach the world with a little more empathy. We'll see you next time.